What did, maybe it's an easy question, it's an easy softball question. Here's, what was the name of that agreement? Remember who negotiated it? John Jay. John Jay. So what was the name of that agreement? Jay's Treaty. Who would have thought it? Jay's Treaty. Now, how did Americans react to Jay's Treaty? Ellen Parker, you are an expert in Jay's Treaty. How did Americans generally react to Jay's Treaty? Oh no, they didn't like it. Particularly the Republicans thought that it was a sellout to the British. And remember, Jay's Treaty was kind of embarrassing treaty that America accepts to avoid war. At the same time that they were accepting this embarrassing treaty, remember, the same Federalist government that accepted this treaty was sending 12,000 troops to put down the Whiskey Rebellion, which really exacerbates tensions between the two political factions. What is Pinckney's Treaty? Pinckney's Treaty, 1795. Who does it involve? Oh, this is a good one, Amelia. If the kids do not watch this on television, they won't know. Go ahead.
It involves Spain and it gave free navigation to the Mississippi.
Very nice, very nice. It involves Spain and it gave free navigation to the Mississippi River. So Pinckney's Treaty we did not talk about in class, but obviously is in your book. And it was an agreement between Spain and the United States and dealt with New Orleans. And New Orleans was enormously important to the United States, but is under Spanish control until 1803, correct? And so in 1795, Spain controlled New Orleans. Now, Jay's Treaty causes a lot of consternation, as does the Whiskey Rebellion. So much so that Washington decides he's out. He is done. And so he determines, wow, I'm okay. No more, I'm okay. I saw a concern in your face for my health. I'm okay. It's not the swine flu. I'm over 49 years of age, so I'm not eligible to be inoculated. Apparently, somewhere in my life, I acquired immunities to the swine flu, so I should be okay. Now, when Washington retired, he delivers a farewell address via the newspapers to the country. And we said this farewell address warns of the dangers of partisan bickering, and it also warns the United States not to do what? This is important. Not to do what? Go ahead, Karen. Do not become involved in entangling alliances with European powers, right, Karen? Treaties, agreements that would entangle us in Europe. Don't become involved. And as fate would have it, dear friends, we said that Washington's farewell address, this warning, which was not policy, not any action of Congress, nothing more than a warning by, the first president, becomes...
Dr. Murray, you have a phone call in the office. Dr. Murray, phone call in the office.
Becomes a pillar of U.S. foreign policy, as does the Monroe Doctrine, which we talked about today. The Monroe Doctrine that suggested that the United States and Europe were separate places and that we considered Latin America to be our sphere of influence. Everybody stay out. Okay, now, Washington retires and Adams narrowly defeats Jefferson for the presidency in 1796. And we talked a little bit about that. We talked about Jefferson, becoming Adams' vice president, and how bizarre that was. But what was the big thing that Adams struggles with in his administration? The big, sort of overwhelming problem that the U.S. faces, Jason? Yes. What were the French mad about? They were mad about something we just talked about a moment ago. They were mad about the election, yes.
Neutrality.
And neutrality, and more specifically Jay's Treaty, that they thought was an insult. You are willing to take a terrible treaty with our enemy to benefit them, but you won't support us. And so they were insulted by that. And they began to violate our neutrality. And Adams attempted to address that problem in the same way that Washington did. He sent envoys over to try to negotiate. But what happened to the envoys that Adams sent over to France? Joy, they didn't get the same reaction as John Jay. What happened to them?
They wouldn't talk to them.
They wouldn't talk to them, and the French would not speak with them. But the people that came to tell them that the French would not speak to them were called Mr. X, Mr. Y, and Mr. Z. And the entire debacle where France France basically ignores, rejects, and attempts to solicit bribes from the American envoys that go over to settle these disputes is called the XYZ Affair. Now, the XYZ Affair almost gets us into war with France. We fight what we call a quasi-war with France, meaning that the French are shooting at us, we are shooting at them, but the United States Congress does not declare war. Troops are not necessarily deployed. The French do not declare war, but guys are getting killed. Things are being, the property is being destroyed. Most of the fighting occurs in the Caribbean. Now, because we're on the brink of war, and because the Republicans seem to be aligned with the French, and because there was a fear that the French would invade and align themselves with the Republicans and overthrow the federal government, the Federalists passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. Now, what was the most sort of glaring aspect of the Alien and Sedition Act? The Sedition Acts, Burhani, what was the most disturbing aspect of it? Oh, because in the Sedition Act you say that it became illegal to criticize the national government, did it not? That was considered to be sedition. And you could be imprisoned or fined if you criticized the national government. And Republican editors were imprisoned and fined for criticizing the national government. Now, what was the Republican reaction, Madison and Jefferson's reaction to the Alien and Sedition Act? They couldn't challenge it in the Supreme Court, so where did they challenge it? In the legislatures. In what manner?
They forced they influenced the states of Virginia and Kentucky to pass resolutions.
Do we call these the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions? Continue, my dear friend.
Yeah, they were enormously important, but they really had no power.
Yes.
They basically just announced the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Yes, the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions were very important because they articulated this notion that the Constitution was a compact among the states, and as such, who got to determine who was the final arbiter of constitutionality if the Constitution was a compact among the states? Felix?
The states.
The states would, right? And this notion that the states could do this was a pretty important notion. Now, it doesn't have any force now, but later it's going to be important. Now, the election of 1800 rolls around, and it is Adams versus Jefferson again. And Adams is going to be defeated by Jefferson this time. And remember, we said that part of the reason that Adams was defeated is when he had an opportunity to make peace with France, he took it. That eventually the French decided they had kind of made a mistake in rejecting the American envoys, and Napoleon had taken control of the French government, and he kind of didn't want to fight the Americans, so he makes an overture for peace. And when he makes this overture for peace, Adams, rather than rejecting it, accepts it. A negotiated settlement occurs between the United States and France, and we don't fight them. And the problem then for the Federalists and Adams is that when that occurs, we are all dressed up with nowhere to go. We had expanded the size of the Navy, expanded the size of the Army, raised taxes, and now we didn't have anybody to fight. And the Jeffersonians had opposed this entire thing, and in 1800 they were able demographically, because of Kentucky, Tennessee, and some of the western states entering the Union, to elect Jefferson as president. And Jefferson called his election as president the Revolution of 1800, to some extent because it represented, in his mind, the restoration of true Republican government. We also mentioned that it was a remarkable thing, the peaceful transfer of power between two bitterly opposed factions. Now, once Jefferson was in office, what he attempts to do is to implement the philosophy of the Republicans. Shrink the size of the national government, shrink the influence of the national government, shrink the regality of the national government and the presidency. I mean, this is one of the few times in history where it actually happens. The excise tax is repealed, the size of the Army and Navy is cut, the Alien and Sedition Acts are allowed to expire, and so, Jefferson actually follows through. But we said that he runs into a